All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hey, Catherine, good to see you there. Yep, back at the office for today. I ended up coming in to grab some paperwork and some things I forgot, including the shirt that I'm wearing today, which I'm going to adjust this so everyone can see, provided by our Old Parish Preservation Volunteers here in Norwood. So particular thanks to Sue Bartlett and Patty Fanning and all of the Old Parish volunteers. If folks don't know, Old Parish is our historic old cemetery here in Norwood. Hi, Kate, and hi, Katie. It's right up here. I always say it's right by near Town Hall here. It is our historic cemetery. Some of the graves date back centuries. And we have a very dedicated group of volunteers, the Old Parish volunteers, who have been preserving and working on the stones for quite a while now. And they're actually submitting to town meeting through the CPA a request for an Old Parish cemetery master plan. So I think what we'll likely see in the cemetery in a couple of years is probably some nice new fencing around it and some additional work to really make sure we're investing in our old historic cemetery. It is a beautiful cemetery if you've ever had a chance to take a walk through there. Not this July 4th, the one before, a bunch of us read Frederick Douglass from there. They do a Hi Christiana from Tasso's. Incidentally, Tasso's has the best veal in town, just saying. Veal parm from Tasso's is the best. Just my opinion, though. But anyway, Old Parish Cemetery, we do a lot of Veterans Day events start off from there. It's just a great historic asset here in town. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, I do. Check out the Old Parish volunteers. They go up and they restore headstones and they do a lot of work in the cemetery. So by all means, please check it out. And thanks to Sue and Patty and all those other Old Parish volunteers who are always up there doing great volunteer work for us. And we certainly appreciate it. So we're going to jump right into our COVID numbers. And I have some good news. I know you probably can't all read this from home, but if you notice that little bar right there, we are green this week. Now that's a great thing, and that's good for Norwood, and I really do appreciate what everyone's doing to keep us safe. And it's particularly important that we understand what that means, as well as what's gotten us here. Sorry for the shaking of the screen. And why it's particularly important to show that Norwood is doing very well. So as you know, the state has their three levels: red, yellow, green, and gray. There's actually 4 yellows. Obviously, you want to be in gray. That means you have less than 5 cases and you really have no prevalence of COVID in the community. Green, yellow, and red are based on the average cases per 100,000 residents, or the math done to otherwise equate it out. We started off in green like a lot of communities, and then we jumped into yellow when we've been at yellow for quite a while. And we always assumed that we'd probably stay in the yellow category somewhat in perpetuity, because there's always going to be some level of infectious disease spread in the community. There's always going to be a certain percentage of the population that has COVID. One of the things Norwood has done well is we have not, knock on wood, had any big spikes, and we have not had any clusters since the state started tracking the data this way. And that's important too, because if we did get a cluster or a group somewhere, depending on, that may throw us into red, but that may not mean that we make any changes to our levels of restrictions. A couple of examples we've talked about: Rentham a few weeks ago had cases at a nursing home that threw their numbers up. The town of Middleton had cases at a jail. Middleton now, I think, has the highest rate in the state. It's a fairly small town, except it's all limited to just the jail. So, and I think North Andover, whichever one has Merrimack College in it, I always get the directional towns confused. They've seen a spike. It's all related to Merrimack College. It's a little bit more challenging there because the college is more integrated with the community. The nursing home is not nearly as integrated with the community, and certainly the prison in Middleton is not integrated in the community. So Norwood has dropped down to a positivity rate of less than 1%, which is phenomenal. Now that could change next week. We're always looking at our trends, but we're about where we were back in early August. So that's pretty critical, because look at Norwood, where we've been very aggressive with outdoor dining. We've kept all of our parks open. St. Catherine's went back a couple weeks ago full in person, and now the schools are on their second or third week of the hybrid learning model. We have had some youth sports playing. We ran camps this summer. We ran pools this summer. The Civic is open, and the library is open 3 days a week to the public. A couple hours a day, 6 days a week to the public. So what you're seeing is, with the exception of being able to go to a bar and larger performance venues, we're almost as open as we reasonably can be, and we've got less than 1%, and we're in the green. that means that Norwood is doing it right. Now, this could change, and I could be here in a couple of weeks telling everyone, well, we didn't do it right, and we had this problem or that problem, and the numbers have skyrocketed. But it's a testament to people following those basic rules that are important. Wearing your mask, as we all know, and I know we haven't had to do this in a while, but the mask goes over the nose. I'm guilty sometimes of it dripping a little bit like this. There's an NCM video that'll come out where I'm constantly moving my nose up because my mask was dropping, and I'm doing this every 2 seconds. And it's also trying to stay home or avoid public gatherings when you're sick and when you think you're sick. And that's something we've talked about a lot internally, that it really comes down to personal responsibility to keep our numbers green. And we may go back to yellow, certainly possible. A difference of a handful of cases will put us back into yellow, and that's okay as long as the community is safe. But the personal decision not to attend parties, not to attend big gatherings, to make them limited, to do it in a safe way when you do, that makes a huge difference in the actual spread in our community. And it's also about some personal responsibility where we understand that not everyone is fortunate enough that if you don't feel well, you're going to lose money if you end up going to work and not going to work. And that's certainly a concern. But let's say you were going to go to a small celebration that wasn't critical. It's not somebody you're very close with's wedding. It's just hey, a few of us are getting together, and maybe you have a tiny little sniffle or a tiny tickle in your throat. Just don't take the risk. And I think a lot of us doing things like that with that personal responsibility is important because, more and more events are going to open up. People are going to want to do things. Maybe that's the case. Kids, if they're going to school, if your kid's not sure, have them stay home. I know I'm not an education expert. And I know that's not always easy for parents, and not every parent has that opportunity. But when you do have that opportunity, I'd recommend to do that. Where we can with work from home staff at the town, that's something we try to do too. And I think it's incumbent on everyone, and it's incumbent on employers out there to be as flexible with their employees as they can be as well. And again, we know that we don't have the best social safety net in the world in the Commonwealth, where some people have jobs where they don't have that opportunity. But I think by and large, being smart on a personal level is absolutely critical. So again, it's somebody's 50th birthday party, and they're going to have just 10 or 12 people over, but you're feeling maybe just a teeny bit under the weather. Chances are it's not COVID, but stay home. Hey, you know what? I might have a tickle. I'm just not going to go out and potentially risk it. If you go to the gym, that's fine. We have not had any cases tied to our gyms or gym usage in Norwood, but maybe you're feeling a little under the weather. What a great excuse not to go to the gym and just say, I've got a little bit of a cold or a cough, or I just maybe am not sick. And I know for me, when I feel like I'm getting sick, sometimes you have a day where you say, gee, am I getting sick? Am I not getting sick? Did I just maybe not sleep well? But try to be reasonable and, avoid things when you can. I think it's proof that this community has been doing it. The fact that we didn't jump into the red, and we haven't yet, and the fact that we're now in the green, which is sort of a bonus that we didn't expect we'd be this low. Especially the more important than just being in the green is that positivity rate of less than 1%. That's probably one of our best positivity rates we've had. Our percent positive is our daily incident rate is 3.8. Last week it was 5.2. The week before it was 6.7. So it is nice to see a 3-week trend of going down. Could certainly go up. Prior to that, it was 5, 5.2, and 6.7, and then it was 4.3, 3.1, and 3.3. So I know those are a lot of numbers. That's actually available. We push this out every week on the health department website. Segal, our health director, makes these up for the average daily case rate. But it shows that we did see an increase, and then it kind of leveled off, and now it's decreased. It could still go back up. But those are very good, very positive COVID numbers, given how much is actually going on in the community. Construction never stopped in Norwood. It rarely, if ever, slowed down. And I know if you're out there looking, the traffic feels almost like what it was. Interestingly enough, Bernie in my office has always monitored the MBTA lots every day and seen how many cars were in there. And I think the other day he counted 30 or 35 in the bigger of the MBTA lots. And that's not nearly what it normally is. But there were times where it was 3, it was 5, it was 6. So you're seeing an enhanced and increased level of activity, and we're able to still keep those numbers down. And that's proof that it can happen. Now, as we know, the problem is somebody may be symptomatic. They may not know that or that somebody may be positive and they may be spreading it. They may not know that, and they go to a whole bunch of places, and it always spreads, and the numbers can go up. We can reasonably control that fairly well. What we're largely seeing with the spread now is it's sporadic. Somebody tests positive, and then it's their family sometimes end up testing positive. But there is still a lot we don't know about COVID. We've had married couples where, one spouse is positive and the other one just never gets positive. It's, the human body is still a mystery, and so some of the things about COVID. We've had cases where one family member tests positive, and then mom and dad and 3 kids test positive. So it happens. And then of course their exposure in the workplace, sometimes that can be a lot, sometimes that can be a little. It all depends on what you do and where you were and how the contact tracing works out. We did have an issue that I want to bring up that I brought up before as it relates to our COVID cases, about folks not necessarily wanting to tell the contact tracers everything. There's no trouble that you get in. And incidentally, we don't look at your taxes as part of the health tracing process. We don't look at building permits. We don't look at immigration status. None of that is relevant to the contact tracing, and none of that gets reported anywhere else, unless there was a serious safety issue where they talked to you and they knew that they thought there was maybe a child safety issue or something like that. But none of that gets reported. Family status, immigration status, living situation. We just need to know where you are, what you've been doing, who's in the household, and what activities they take out. It's about protecting you and your neighbors and your members in your community. So that's critical, that when those contact tracers call, just tell them. Now, we know at some point in time you're going to have gone to a party and maybe you shouldn't have gone to a party, but you got to let them know so we can let those people know. Because for everyone out there who COVID is not a big deal for, and it's not that big of an impact for me, other than an impact on my life, I was lucky that I got through it unscathed and healthy. There's people out there who it is a serious impact for. And you may have been at a party with somebody who's a teacher in a school, and now maybe potentially 20 or 30 kids in that school need to get tested before it gets spread. It all depends on the contact tracing. And the same thing if somebody works on maybe they work in a nursing home. It could be in somebody's life. So just please, if the contact tracers call, if you talk to them, just tell them you went to that party if you went to that party. If your cousin Bob from Arizona is living with you because something happened with Bob and his husband or whatever, and it's a 2-bedroom apartment, you got 5 people, they just need to know so people can be safe. So please, please, please tell them and let them know. Kate, great question. Drop-off boxes in the same places as before? Yes and no. So I'll get to that actually in 1 second. I'll make 2 more quick points about COVID, and then we'll talk about the election and drop-off ballots. One item, we have gotten a couple complaints about folks dropping their masks places, or you're seeing masks show up in lawns or in the trash. You're seeing it in parking lots. That's going to happen. I mean, when people started consuming more paper cups 30, 40 years ago, you'd start to see those go places. You're going to see that more, but try to be mindful of where your masks are. I know you might drop your mask and you certainly don't want to use it again after you've dropped it, and that's fine. But try to hold on to it and just throw it in a trash barrel. It's really gross for somebody else to pick up your mask. I don't want to pick up somebody else's mask. I always grab things like straw wrappers when I'm at a restaurant, and I actually try not to use straws. But when I do, and I'm always throwing them in my pocket and throwing them away when we get home. I don't expect anyone to pick up somebody else's mask, but for all intents and purposes, try to pay attention to it. If you do drop your mask, try to grab it and just hold on to it until you can properly dispose of it. That's really important. And then Halloween, just to review, we've talked about Halloween before. We're asking people, please don't do haunted houses. Please don't do Halloween parties. If you are going to trick or treat, do it safely. You have to wear a mask. And we mean a mask like this in addition to your Halloween mask. I wonder if I could find my Halloween mask from last year as a prop in the closet. But please actually just be safe. If you don't want to participate, simply don't participate. That's okay. What a lot of people are doing, and it's a great idea, is maybe you have a little tray out there with some individual wrapped little baggies of candies that a kid can come up and grab and go and put in their bag. So whether you're the trick-or-treater or the person giving out the candy, be safe, wear masks. Try to keep it to your neighborhood. I know sometimes you may get a bunch of families that want to get kids together and trick or treat. We're asking that you avoid that this year, but if you put your candy out and if you're safe and people are safe, there's no reason you can't have a safe Halloween. Lee Leach, same, no reporting when somebody comes to get food at the food pantry. Yes, if you need to use the ecumenical food pantry, by all means use the ecumenical food pantry. If you are suffering food insecurity, you can also call our Citizen Information Center and our Resident Information Center, and we can get you assistance that way. And I do believe we will be bringing back the weekly family meal program for parts of November and into December. We've taken a look at what's in the Norwood Fund and what we have for CARES Act funding, and we believe we'll be able to bring that back for at least a month or two. So kudos to our food service workers for being able to bring that project back. To Kate's question about the drop-in box, It's currently in front of what we call the old jail near Town Hall, is the drive up one. That will be getting moved back to its original space in the parking lot once we finish the parking lot. But either of them, you can drop your ballot off there, and we do have a drop off spot under the Caroline Tower where Memorial Hall is. So you can drop off your ballots. I do want to jump into talking about the election for a moment because it's very important. Every election is very important. We have received a number of mail-in ballots. It's in the thousands. It's an extraordinary number of ballots, and it's an extraordinary amount of work for the clerk's office. So we've actually closed the clerk's office afternoon, so that way they can focus on the election, because we are 100% committed to a free and fair election and to a flawless election in a safe manner. Is a lot of work. So don't think because if you call and they're not taking a call that somehow it means that your ballot's not going to get counted or you're not going to be able to vote. They will get back to you, but they are focusing on making sure that every ballot is counted, that everything gets mailed out there, and that we are in tip-top shape for this election. We've done a lot, in some cases a lot more than other communities have, to prepare for this election and the last election. We were one of the first towns to do a no-touch election. We'll have some elements of that because remember, on election day, you still can go and vote and it still will be safe. You can do your mail-in voting, and you'll talk about early voting in a moment. But we have rearranged capital projects at Town Hall and maintenance projects at Town Hall and even the maintenance projects of the parking lots, all to make sure that the clerk's office is able to operate and that Mary Lou and her phenomenal team get everything they need to make sure that this election and the last election, of course, in the primary, go well. So we are absolutely committed to doing that and to making sure that we're putting all resources that we have towards the election. I usually have interns in the summer and the fall in my office, and we've basically given our seasonal intern staff to the clerk's office, and they have every resource they have at their disposal. But they also need our support. If you've done your mail-in ballot, you will receive it if you haven't. If you're going to do early voting will be at Memorial Hall. Now, this is one of the confusions we sometimes have. You never vote at Town Hall except when it's early voting. Some people will come here on election day and say, well, I'm here to vote, and they'll insist they voted here last time, which is not necessarily the case except for early voting. So on election day, you will vote in your precinct as you normally do. But here, but for the early voting, we're going to get the early voting schedule. I believe the first day is October 17th. If you want to early vote, you're able to do that as well. We have a number of dates for early voting. Question from Doris: do I understand that in Massachusetts you can't count any votes prior to the polls at close at 8 p.m.? I would have to double check, but the verification process for a ballot is actually pretty simple. It comes in, so it'll say Tony Mazzucco, Manhattan Street, Precinct 2, and you look at the book and you say, okay, Tony Mazzucco, Precinct 2, Manhattan Street, you check it off here, and you do this. Last year, the Secretary of State, I believe, allowed the counting to start a couple of days ahead of time, but getting those ballots into the machine is not necessarily that complicated. The problems that you saw in Franklin were because ballots were like left in a room somewhere. So if it comes in that we have to just only put them in at the end of the night, I don't think that's what's going to happen, but it's not that difficult. Our system in Massachusetts is simple, and it's really probably the best election system in the country, because you fill out the thing, you do your little circle, you slide it in, and then it counts it, and then it gets a dummy receipt of what the votes are. It's pretty difficult to screw it up. Those of us who remember the 2000 election, and we remember the hanging chads and everything, and you remember these cities and states out there that have electronic voting where you hit a button, that can't happen in Massachusetts. So I don't know why people have tried to screw with elections in other states, and they have their chads and their punch boxes and their electronic voting things. I remember an episode of The Simpsons, I think it was the Obama-McCain election, where Homer kept hitting one of them and it kept saying, congratulations, you voted for the other one. Maybe that happens in other states, but in Massachusetts, our voting is safe and secure. It's a common sense system. So if worst case scenario, we have to load ballots in, it doesn't take that long to load in those ballots. And remember, even if we had 20,000 of them, which would be a voter turnout that's like 80 or 90%, and they were all early voting, they were all mail-in ballots, the staff at the wardens, you divide that by 9 precincts, that's realistically only, in that case it would be 1,000 or 1,100 a precinct. It's still a pretty quick and easy process to get them in. Voting is what takes the long time. So you'd have staff there, verify, check, and it goes. Verify, check, in it goes. It's a pretty quick and simple process in Massachusetts. It gets held up if you have a little bit of an issue with the ballot machine, but our system in Massachusetts is far superior to other states. We've been a democracy longer than some of these other states, so I'd like to assume that that's why we get it done so well. But I think our election integrity is top notch in Massachusetts. So you're going to read a lot of narratives out there, and this is one of the problems, is that there's a lot of national narratives on elections and voting and what happens, and you have to remember that every state has a slightly different system, and there are areas where Massachusetts is leagues ahead of the rest of the country. I mean, not for nothing, we're one of the wealthiest and most educated states in the union. We've been doing a lot of this stuff longer than many other states have. So Massachusetts has better states than some of these, and it's awful. I'm not saying it doesn't happen anywhere in Massachusetts, but it's awful that we hear that people waiting in line for hours and hours and hours, and they have one ballot machine for a rural county, and that's the rest of the country. That is not Massachusetts. Now, I know as Americans we may have concerns about the national election, but here in Massachusetts, we have good systems. The Secretary of State's office is an independent office. We have well-established practices. We have a simple election system that's very hard to screw up. And it's a good, simple check system that's very hard to screw up. And then locally in Norwood, remember, we've been voting in the same places for years. We have a clerk staff. I mean, Mary Lou has been running elections in this town for a couple of decades. She has all the support of all the other town departments. So we're particularly fortunate in Norwood in a lot of ways, but particularly in elections. I would trust Mary Lou to run elections in any state or country in the world, and to do them better than they're doing them. And I've worked with many very good town clerks, and the problem is that town clerks manage elections in their town, and they don't manage election systems for the states and for countries. If they did, if you had people like Mary Lou Folan running elections for this country, you'd never have a problem. So check them off and write them. So to your point, Doris, even if we have to wait, and I'll look into that, it's not a big problem in Massachusetts. Other states are other states, and I hope that the national election goes well. And by that, I mean, I hope we have a decision and there are no major problems, and we don't have an SJC decision like we had 20 years ago because of hanging chads. But our election system is second to none, and we have poured more resources into the last two elections and into this one than we ever have to make sure that the clerk's office has every resource they need. And anytime Mary Lou Folan, our town clerk, has needed anything, she gets whatever she wants. Whatever we need to make sure that elections are first and foremost, we're doing. We've already been getting our early voting information out on social media. We're going to continue to push that on social media and on NCM and encourage everyone to vote. We will be doing robocalls as we did for the last elections, which is something that we didn't know before. Something that we hadn't done prior to these elections, but we're going to do more robocalls. So there'll be more information. And I shouldn't say information as in, here's what to vote on this question or here's what this means. Not that, but just reminding people about early voting, about mail-in voting, and about going out to the polls. So probably the couple of days up to Election Day, you're going to get a daily call from the town of Norwood through our E911 system saying, hey, Election Day is on such and such a day. Please go and vote at your precinct. Yeah, Doris, again, if they even have to open every single envelope and verify it, even though there's a lot of them, it's a pretty quick and streamlined process, and we're going to have additional staff ready and standing by to help out with all of that. So we will boom, 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 be able to go through pretty quickly. So I feel we have one of the best election systems around, and we got the best clerk's office in the Commonwealth to be able to handle us. I do encourage you, if you please don't confuse things. If you've requested a mail-in ballot, don't then go and try to early vote and then don't show up at the polls. We do track all of that. Whichever system you've decided is best for you, please follow it through. I have not done mail-in voting. I did early voting to experiment with it during the primary. I sort of personally like going to the poll and voting. I feel a little off on Election Day when I don't get to go to the polls and vote, and I make my corny jokes with the poll workers and everything. And but do what you feel is best for you. Do what you feel is safe. Remember that if nothing else, you can show up on Election Day and vote. It will be a safe election. We'll have many of the same precautions we had last time. So you can always show up on Election Day and vote. It is really up to you, but elections are serious business, and we take them seriously here. We encourage everyone, if you want to do your mail-in voting, do that. If you want to do your early voting, do that. We'll get the early voting schedule on there if we haven't already posted it, and it's on our website, and it's going out through social media and on NCM. So by all means, please vote any way you can. Question from Josephine on when are the mail-in ballots being sent out. I do have to double check, unless Joe, who's producing this episode, knows. I believe they'll be getting mailed out in the next week or two. We have received an enormous amount of them, but we will confirm and we'll post that in the comments once we have the exact number, unless Mary Lou might be jumping on, or we'll see if we can get her question from her about when they'll be sent out. And remember, when they do get sent out, okay, so Eileen received hers yesterday, so some of them already have gone out. Remember that they will get sent out in batches at different times, and everyone receives them at a slightly different time. So it may be that you think you and your neighbor got them, sent them out on the same day, and you may receive them on different days. It's okay. The post office kind of works that way. And pre all the politics that have gone on with the post office is its own unique beast. I remember, for whatever reason, when we did a bulk mailing when I worked for the town of Adams, it had to all get shipped to Springfield to then get shipped back to the town of Adams to be distributed locally. But it seems like some people are already receiving their ballot. If you have sent in for yours and you haven't received it yet, the mail will come through. We've got quite a few people who have already gotten theirs. Eileen, Kate, and Bob have already gotten theirs, so it seems like some folks are already getting them. If you have sent yours in, you will receive it. Please don't call the clerk's office unless it's been an inordinate amount of time. We want them to focus on getting everything out. The fact that 4 folks have already gotten theirs yesterday or this week, I think, is an indication that we have a great clerk's office and we've been putting all of the resources there. But if it's gone a while, Josephine, since you've sent yours in and you haven't heard anything, if it goes a week or so, you can always just shoot an email to the clerk's office at clerk@nordma.gov and just say, hey, should I worry about this? And they can always double check. These processes still involve human beings, but we had no issues with the last 2 elections, so we think we'll be good for this one. The rest of the country, we'll see how they do. But I often make the joke, vote early, vote often. Whichever system you want to go with, please vote in the election. It'd be great if we could see a historic vote turnout for this election. And after the election, make sure to send a thank you note to our lovely clerk's office and thanking them for the wonderful job that they do keeping democracy safe for us here. And Michelle actually just posted this Track My Ballot search link that the Secretary of State does, and I'd encourage you to do that. A lot of people have had success with it. A lot of people like watching it. Again, if you do have yours mailed out the same day that a neighbor does and one of you gets yours and the other doesn't, it's okay. Just give it a day or so before you do that. But elections matter and voting matters, so we encourage everyone to vote. We will be doing more outreach and more information than we have in the past, encouraging everyone to vote. It'd be great if we could get a historic turnout for this election in Norwood this year. A couple of other updates, or unfortunately non-updates. We did get a question about the hospital. Our understanding at this point is Stewart is waiting for they're waiting for their insurance determination to decide sort of which direction they're able to go in. We will be submitting zoning to town meeting in November because we know that whatever happens, there needs to be a major reconstruction there. And we actually haven't looked at that zoning in probably 30 or more years, probably since the last construction project in the early 80s. So we'll be submitting something to make sure they can go forward, but they're at a decision point now where they're waiting to see what their insurer is telling them, which will sort of mark out what their path going forward is. As soon as we hear something and we know, we'll be certain to share with everyone. I know it's been tough for a lot of employees who haven't got notification. We all thought that we'd have an ER up and running already. We don't know what the end result on that is going to be. We talked, I think, last week about if they try to do something at the facility with a temporary utilities plant so they can use the cath lab, that would end up getting disrupted quite a few times as they reconstruct the building. If they try to do something off-site, they might be able to do things like CT scans and other things, but they won't have beds, and then they won't have that cath lab, which is critical. But we're all feeling the short-term loss of the hospital. I am still confident that what will eventually be there will be a brand new state-of-the-art facility that will serve us well for the next 50 or 100 years. It's just how much pain are we going to go through between now and then to get there. And I know there's a lot of anxiety out there in the community. There's a lot of urgent cares that you can call if you're sick and you're ill, but if it is an emergency, call 911. 911 is still working. Our fantastic paramedics are still out there responding to calls, and fire and police are still out there responding to calls as well. So if it's an emergency, call 911. Don't worry about, well, geez, the hospital shut down. Am I going to get taken here or get taken there? Please, please call 911 if it's an emergency, and they will respond and you will get taken care of. Dean Street. Open and ready to go. The Dean Street Bridge project has completed. We were able to open it up earlier today. The project came in ahead of schedule. The project came in under budget. Kudos to the DPW for overseeing that project. And Dean Street is open and ready to go. The culvert is supposed to last us 50 years. So some of us will be sitting here in 50 years and you'll hear about a project to spend a couple $1 million to redo redo the Dean Street Bridge, and some of us will say, I remember they just did that bridge, but it should be a 50-year process before we have to do it again. But luckily, Dean Street is open. The bridge is complete. The project went as planned, slightly ahead of time and under budget. So great job, Mark Ryan and Sarah and Mike Driscoll and the whole team at the DPW and the contractor. So Dean Street is open. We'll have no further updates on Dean Street other than it is open, and we're grateful that that project has completed. A brief storm update on the storm we had last night. We at one point in time had over 3,500 power outages, and I have my notes from our fantastic light department. Jim Collins is our light department superintendent, and last night so the way the light department operates, this is actually just a question that some folks have asked. Jim Collins is the superintendent of the light department, and then we have 2 assistant superintendents, and then we have a couple an operations manager and a couple electrical engineers. And when there's a larger storm, it's all hands on deck. So they all deploy, and all the linemen deploy, and we have our tree contractor on site cutting and moving trees, which is one of the reasons we're able to get to storm damage so quickly. But each week there's a different senior staff member of the light department who's on call, and they're sort of the incident commander for that storm. So even though everyone, maybe the superintendent and the assistant superintendents, are responding and working, there's always whoever's on call is the one in charge of that storm incident. So last night it was our operations manager, Jason Haber, who's a great engineer, has been with us for quite a while. Jason was in charge last night, and we had 2 feeders that went out. At one point in time, we had about 3,500 customers out, and we were able to get 95% up by really a little after 7 o'clock, and by I think 10:30 last night, we were pretty much at 100%. Sometimes there's 1 or 2 lingering homes where they may have had a local issue where it's just the wire to their home got cut. That tends to take a little bit longer, but we've always worked on having the type of switching system so we can get power back up and running as fast as possible. I know that there were, again, about 3,500 outages at the peak. Within an hour of those starting, we were down to under 100 outages. And as of this morning, there were, I think Walpole and Westwood woke up with 20% of their towns out of power. We were pretty much done and in bed by 10 o'clock or 10:30. So kudos to the light department and for another great job in a storm. We had the storm passed actually very quickly. It was, maybe 20, 25 minutes of really bad weather, and then everything kind of normalized after that, except we had a number of power outages. I was out, and it was, what damage there was done quickly, but we got it back up and running, and everyone was back on power, and that's a good thing, and we're going to continue to look forward to that. A lot of other communities will complain about, is there enough tree trimming being done, and can more tree trimming being done? What a lot of private utilities, we call them IOUs or investor-owned utilities, have done in the last several decades is they've really cut their preventative maintenance because they're capped on how much profit they can make as a regulated industry, just as we are. The light department can only make so much money. So one of the things that a lot of IOUs have done is they have cut back on a lot of that preventative maintenance. In some of it's forest management and some of it is just tree trimming, because it effectively allows them to reallocate that money in their budget and make it look like they're making a little bit more money. We've never done that. There's always an opinion as to whether or not you should trim a tree or not. And the way it works for those of us in municipal government is if a resident likes a tree, it always happens to be on their property. But when they no longer like the tree, conveniently, it seems to be on town property. But we have a very aggressive tree maintenance program in town. You can't completely trim all trees and cut all trees so that you're not going to have any issue. But by being aggressive, we have less issues when there's a storm. But the other half of our preparation has always been, we maintain a contractor. So that way, when a tree brings down a line, because you could do $1 million worth of tree trimming every year, I could spend $5 million worth of tree trimming every single year. And sometimes a storm comes through and it just uproots a tree that's well into your front lawn and it knocks out a pole. It can happen. I mean, you can't, the only way to make sure you never have a tree take down a line is to cut down every tree within line of a distance of a light line. And that would never be able to happen. And we certainly wouldn't want that to happen if you could. But we maintain that tree vendor, and it's Pathfinder who we use, who's the best in the industry, at least from my having to deal with tree vendors. We maintain them on, I say on staff, but on call. So that way, when a tree does fall, when it takes out a branch or it leans on a branch, we're able to get it real quick. So we're able to go in, we get rid of the tree, and then we can fix the lines pretty quickly. IOUs have to act a little differently, and they don't necessarily act that way. They do bring on contractors, but our focus has always been get the power up and running as quickly as we can, get the trees out of the way, and then the linemen can go in and do their job and do it. We also, our department is engineer led, so the command structure, if you will, of the light department is engineers. I, as the general manager of the light plant, have the statutory head as the light department executive, but I'm not an electrical engineer. Our superintendent and assistant superintendents are all electrical engineers, and we have some additional additional electrical engineers. So we're not just sending somebody out, and this does happen sometimes in the IOUs, whether it's their staff or a contractor, saying, well, just patch whatever you have to patch to get things fixed and walk away. Our engineers are out there making decisions with the linemen and with the light department staff to make sure we're looking at the whole system, to make sure that we're getting power on as quickly as possible, but that we're not making repairs or switches that are going to cause problems down the road or cost us more just because we happen to be working in this town today and then we're going to be working in some other town down the road. So I certainly can't speak enough of our light department, but that's a little bit about how we sort of operate, or how the light department operates during a storm. Of course, you know, we always have somebody in charge of DPW. Same thing, they maintain one of the foreman or one of the assistant superintendents, or Mark himself, who are in charge for an incident, and then it's on all hands on deck for a storm. And we also maintain a DPW shift worker 24/7, which most towns don't do. That allows the DPW to be able to call other people in quickly, to be able to triage things, and early on to know when there's a problem. They're able to get get staff in and get certain things taken care of quickly by doing that. So it's a collaborative effort that we're able to respond well to storms. We also, on the fire side, generally when we know we need additional staff, if there's a storm coming, we'll call in additional staff to be ready. And same thing on the police side. I mean, there's not a storm where myself and Bernie Cooper and both chiefs and Mark and Jimmy and all of the line staff and the supervisory staff are not all sort of in constant communication about what's going on. So that's how we're able to respond so well. From the power outages we had, I think at one point the state had 200,000 people without power, 200,000 customers. When I woke up this morning, they were at 100,000 without power, and there's still some folks who didn't get their power back until early this afternoon. So another storm that came quickly and passed quickly, and luckily this one didn't have any heavy rain with it. It was mostly just the wind. I did mention the weekly family meal program that we had done through the school department will be returning sometime in November and December. And kudos to our cafeteria workers who have been working literally every single day since this pandemic began. And if you do have children in Norwood, not just Norwood Public School students, but if they are homeschooled, if they're doing remote learning, if they're doing a remote learning enrichment program, if they're going to St. Catherine's, they can get food picked up through the schools. You have to contact school food service. They can get breakfast and lunch the days they're doing it. That is any child under the age of 18 or under, if they're school age in Norwood, whether they're in school, out of school, remote learning, go to Norwood Public, go to St. Catherine's, go to Safarian, go to a charter school, whether you homeschool them. So if your student is under 18 and does not take advantage of the school food service program, I highly recommend that you do. It is free breakfast and lunch. By taking it, you're not taking it away from somebody else. They always can produce enough. They actually get a reimbursement from the federal government for it. So the more people that do it, the more people we keep working, the more revenue we keep flowing into the program. So by all means, I encourage doing it. I think it's great food, and we have great cafeteria workers in Norwood who, again, have worked every single day of this pandemic, right from when it began in March through to today. So we owe a great deal of gratitude to them. And there's a lot of other folks who have worked every single day too. But my heart goes out to the cafeteria workers who have been serving meals every single day since March. School never ended for them. They were never able to go remotely. They've been giving it 110% all year long. Our citizen call center is still up and running, and if you have any questions, you can call there and they'll let you know the appropriate place to get in touch with, or they'll research your issue. It's also a great place to call if you need food security and food assistance. By all means, call them and let them know. The Norwood Fund is still active. We're always taking donations. We are seeing an increase now with some utility bills and some food needs as some of the unemployment has continued to drag on. We are at some point in the next year going to look at whether we could sort of spin the Norwood Fund off as its own 501c3 as a means to always make sure we have some funds available for people in those situations. So if anyone's interested in volunteering on something like that down the road, you can always let me know. Central Street is still open. Outdoor dining is still going. What we're seeing is it sort of ebbs and flows with the winter, with the weather. We know it'll eventually come to an end in the winter. We are already making plans to bring it back as soon as we reasonably can next season. We're excited to be working with restaurants on that. We're looking for some flexibility from the state to make it easier as they did this time, but we'll be continuing to do that as long as we reasonably can, and then get it up and running early next season as well. Same thing with Central Street. We're looking the end of October, November. As long as it's being used, we'll continue to do it. Central Street, interestingly enough, has survived all of these storms this year largely intact. So I find that it's quite the resilient setup there. Town meeting will be November 12th, or I should say it'll be the first night of town meeting. It may continue 2 or 3 nights if we need to. We'll be getting information out soon. I believe the selectmen will be approving a warrant next week, and we'll be doing some Facebook Lives and some go-to-meetings for the different articles that are on the budget. It will be at the high school. We'll do the sort of distancing in the gym that we did in the past. We may have a limited outdoor seating option. We're going to recommend it for anyone who thinks they need it due to health reasons. But we will be able to accommodate that if you're willing to sit outside in November in the cold. And I believe you can still go to the ecumenical food pantry if you have food needs. And I believe that's it. The only other update is we are still finalizing. We've gotten a majority through a majority of the Tier 1 applicants on our flood grant program. And we're just finalizing Tier 2 and Tier 3. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like we've had funds available for businesses. There were a lot of businesses and nonprofits that were hit, but we'll be able to get something for most of the applicants who had applied. Question from Nick: will Sumner Street get repaved this year after water lines are replaced? I will have to take a look. So we don't always repave a street just because water lines have been done. It depends on the overall age of the street. I have to look at where it is in the replacement plan. We are looking next year to do a whole heck of a lot more water borrowing, and also borrowing to do more road work. That gives us a little bit of flexibility. But sometimes if we're just opening up the road and it's otherwise in reasonably good shape, we don't necessarily do it. But I don't specifically know where Sumner Street is for getting repaved. Let me actually make myself a note to check on Sumner Street and where it is in the schedule. It also depends sometimes on how the winter impacts a street. So we'll have sort of, hey, here's the roads we're going to pave next year because this is what's in sort of the highest need. And then winter hits, and roads that were high need now are not high need, and we had some particular damage to other roads. But we will take a look at Sumner Street and see if it's on the need. We're looking to borrow, if we go with a full infrastructure plan, each of the next 5 years, about $2.5 million for additional road paving. There are towns that do more road work than us. There are towns that do less road work than us. We'd like to try to get caught up, because one of the challenges we face is you take a road like Washington Street. It's a very busy corridor. It realistically needs to get redone roughly every 10 years, but it eats up almost a year's worth of road money every year that it gets done. So a lot of the smaller streets that are not as high a priority because they're not heavily traveled, they end up going 20, 30, 40 years, and sometimes they can go that long, but there are roads where we're coming up on the third repaving of Nichols or Washington Street, and other folks are saying, gee, are we ever going to get to some of the smaller roads? And it's a catch-22, because we need to put the money on the roads that get used the most, but sometimes the smaller streets, if we do them right, we can get 30 years out of them in good shape because they're used less. So we're looking to be able to try to address some of those and have some of that flexibility. We're building into the borrowing for the road bond, for the water line bond, that we're looking to do about $4.5 million worth of water work next year, and then going forward each year for about 10 years to try to line all of our water lines within 10 years. We're looking to include some allowance in that for paving. Now, we will try to match up our schedule for paving and water lining, where if a road's in rough shape, it might be, okay, well, this year we're going to beat it up a lot with some water work, and then next year schedule it for paving. There will be an allowance in that bond for a little bit of paving in some cases where it's a smaller road, where it's like, good God, the road is in awful shape. We're going to do it all at the same time. We're trying to just invest more in our infrastructure, and we're looking at a project or a program that we'd probably have to go through a number of layers of approval, including a ballot vote in the next year or two, that would get us additional funding for through an additional levy for more stormwater work to address some of the climate change challenges we're facing with more storms, and ultimately more of an investment in our stormwater network. We're not quite there yet on that, but we're starting with additional road and water. Once the water's set, we'll take a short pause and invest more in sewer as those bonds start to come down. We'll also look at something in the next year or two to do some comprehensive work on stormwater, but we're talking about 10 and 20 year infrastructure plans. But the time is now to make sure we're doing that kind of work on our infrastructure. But we can check on Sumner Street and where we are. I know there's a lot of roads. There's a couple of streets in South Norwood I can think of. The road, it escapes my name, that goes down to Father Max. I mean, there's if we had $10 million a year for road paving, we could spend $10 million a year for road paving, believe me. But we are looking to get more and more streets with road paving every year. With that, I believe that's the end of my updates. I'd be happy to take any questions folks have in the comments. While we're seeing if anyone does have one, I'll just repeat some of our COVID numbers. We are green this week, Norwood, so great job for going green and for being green. We have a 3.8 daily incident rate, which is great. That puts us into green. We could pop back into yellow next week or even go to red. It's always possible. Total tests to date in Norwood are just under 16,000. That means that about half the people in town have had a test. Now, some of those could be multiple tests. I know I had more than one myself, but I think that's still a pretty high number. The 14-day test count, so that's the number of tests that we've had in the last 14 days, is 2,400. So people in Norwood are still averaging close to 100 tests a day, which is pretty incredible that that's the level of testing. Our positivity rate, under 1% at 0.91%, which is absolutely phenomenal for positive test rates. And we just ask everyone to keep up the good work. It's really about personal responsibility. Eileen, while I have you here on the Facebook chat, I am going to mention something that I cannot take credit for the idea. I worked on it with Debbie Holmwood, but we're thinking of bringing forward a small proposal to the selectmen in the next couple of weeks, where every year, the number of vehicles that we buy, we would also buy and plant one tree for every vehicle we buy. Now, I think as everyone knows, the town maintains a pretty large fleet: police, fire, public works, light, school transportation, administrative vehicles. So every year we're buying 10, 15 vehicles. So Debbie and I came up with this idea of, well, we're always looking, can we plant more trees? Where do we plant them? How do we come up with something? Well, for every vehicle we buy that's not an electric vehicle, which is the majority of our fleet, given the nature of the type of work we do, we should also buy and plant a tree. So I think it's a great little sustainability initiative. And Eileen, I thought right of you when we came up with that idea. So credit to Debbie Holmwood for a great idea there. And we might look at bringing something forward to that. It's really not that expensive to buy a tree per vehicle every year, but I think it's a cool little sustainability initiative that the town could do every year. If we buy 10 vehicles, we also buy and plant 10 new trees somewhere in town. With that, that's the end of my updates. I hope if anyone has any questions, they can post them here in the comments, and you can always email us at managers@norwoodma.gov. I'll do a quick check and see if we've had any. Nope, have not had any last minute ones that have come in, but I will. I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. I think it's a long weekend, but my days seem to roll into one or the other. But you can always comment in the comments. You can also let us know, email us about managers@norwoodma.gov if you have any questions. I ask everyone, please stay safe out there, and please continue to practice mask wearing and personal responsibility, and we can keep our numbers where they are and keep society moving forward. So thank you, everyone. Special thanks to the Old Parish. I got to learn how to talk on a camera. Our Old Parish Preservation volunteers for the shirt and for all the great volunteer work they do at Old Parish. Check them out online and check them out up at the cemetery. They do a lot of different events there throughout the years, and they are doing incredible work restoring a lot of our most historic graves in town. Thank you, Michelle and Eileen. We think it's a great idea, and I think it'll be a great initiative to bring to the town. Everyone have a great weekend, and thank you very much. And please reach out to us if you need anything here in the comments or managers@norwoodma.gov. Thanks, everyone.